right, welcome everyone to More Than Walking's first video discussion group. Today we have Corey Pheez Lee sharing and hosting the discussion today as we ask the question, how has our racial identity affected our experience as a person with a disability? Corey is a father, a husband, a hip hop musician from Connecticut who has C4 quadriplegia. Corey, honored to have you here hosting the discussion today, and I'll let you introduce everyone else and take the questions from here.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it. Good morning, wherever you are. Good afternoon, evening. As Jonathan said, my name is Corey. I go by the rap name Pheez, and I'm an aspiring artist here in Connecticut. We're going to talk about a wide-ranging, questions as far as pertaining to race, disability, and maybe some of the inequities that some of us have faced during the course of our journey with our disability. So as for myself, I'm a C4, C5 quadriplegic. I became a quad June 12, 2005 in a diving accident that took place down in Virginia Beach. I was about 22. I was in the Navy, and that effectively ended my career as far as the kind of the heights and the plateaus I wanted to reach in terms of the service, but it didn't end my journey. And I find myself here and blessed with the opportunity to meet other people who are going through similar situations. And I hope that we can all grow from the things that we're experiencing together. But I'd like to also talk about during this journey, or somebody in general that may have inspired you all. I know for me, it's been my wife throughout this entire process. I didn't know my wife beforehand, but I met her afterwards. And once you become injured, I don't know if some of you guys share this same experience, but you know that maintaining and having relationships are very difficult. And sometimes you automatically assume and jump to the conclusion that you may never go on to have a fulfilling relationship outside of with maybe your friends and family members. So when I met my wife, she was, one of the few people that really looked past my injury and decided to bet on love rather than what's, painfully obvious and what have you. And so that's just a little bit about myself. And, I'd open up the same question. Everybody just take your turn. Just talk about where you're from, your disability, and maybe somebody that has inspired you. And anybody can feel free to jump in.
I will go. I am Nakeitha. I go by Keita. I reside in Connecticut. I'm originally from the Bahamas. My injury took place in 95 of August. I was 17. This journey has been a real roller coaster, and I think other people that I've come to meet in the disability community inspire me, because before them, I really didn't know much about my own disability, if I was a complete or an incomplete. So just getting to know different people in the community, learning about their disability helped me learn a lot about my own disability. It's been kind of rough because my situation, unlike others, is different because I'm undocumented. So a lot of the privileges my friends have that I come in contact with, I don't have. So in some ways it's a struggle, but it's a blessing in disguise because I feel like I can still encourage other people to not give up just because they're disabled or they're undocumented. So, I think the community as a whole has inspired me to just keep pushing.
I can go next. My name's Krista Adamson. I was hurt in 1985 in California. So I'm a C6 quad, and since that time, I've had 2 kids. I married. I met my husband in college, and have had 2 kids. Who one just got married last weekend. Yay! In one of those weird COVID weddings. I now reside in Connecticut. The year I got hurt, I was a swimmer and won in the Division II Nationals, and so I was an athlete in the past and used a lot of that to really sort of embrace and enjoy rehab. Probably about a month into my injury, and as much as I was a biology major at the time, I was 20 years old when I got hurt, and as much as I knew the science of my injury, I wasn't absorbing the injury, and things like being able to feel parts of my hands, which even later on took me a long time to notice that I really wasn't feeling temperature, let's say, but feeling my thumbs and things like that when I was in ICU, thinking, oh yeah, but my hands will work and I'll be okay because my hands will work. And by the time I figured that out, I was okay for abundance of reasons. But for one thing, the doctor that I had as my physiatrist in the hospital was in a wheelchair. And it wasn't that he was a doctor at all. That wasn't what inspired me. He was happy. He always came with a smile on his face, and he enjoyed life. He didn't have a spinal cord injury. He had gotten Guillain-Barré after he did medical school and his residency, but he was paralyzed nonetheless. But he was happy, and there was comfort in that. And so I would say he was my biggest inspiration.
I'll go next.
This is Everett Mosher.
I'm the newbie on the block. I sustained my injury in 2014. And I was very, very fortunate. I started watching YouTube videos right after my injury, even when I was still in rehab. And I saw what other people were doing. I watched a lot of Aaron Fotheringham, and to see this guy going into a skate park in his wheelchair, that inspired me. I'm a T6 Complete Paraplegic, and I also was an IT manager. So I went back to work probably a month after I left rehab, which I wouldn't recommend anyone doing, but the workforce with people I had worked with for 20 years, when they looked at me, they didn't see an injury. They just saw that I was back working, and they were very happy for that. I just retired in November, just before the pandemic hit. I sold my home with the idea that I'd build a house next to my son, because I have 3 grown children and they want to make sure that I'm with them for the rest of my life. So I live alone. I live with my dog, and currently I'm in an apartment, and hopefully either late this fall or early next spring, I can move into my house, because I don't have an ADA compliant apartment, but I'm managing well. And of course, all of the community around me inspires me. I go to a rehabilitation gym, and just seeing people like Nakeitha working so hard, to stay as healthy as possible. And we're in with traumatic brain injury and acquired brain injury, stroke victims, clients that are around us, I find each one of them really inspiring in their own way. And I have to say, I'm happy. I'm enjoying life. I'm going tent camping. One thing I purposed after my injury is that every year I would try something new. A friend of mine and I tried to go climb portions of Mount Monadnock. That didn't work real well. You know, there are days that I forget that I'm in a wheelchair. It's a good feeling because you know you're not being defined by, you know, your disability. So I'm just very grateful.
I'll introduce myself last. I'm Jonathan. I'm a C7 complete, and I was injured in India in 2006 before finishing my rehab in Connecticut. And I live in Stratford, Connecticut now. And someone who inspired me was one of the first people who I met after I was injured, a Indian paraplegic named Papu. And he didn't speak English. I didn't speak Hindi, but I was there in the hospital, and he rolled up next to me and would hold my hand and just kind of be there with me. And he was my first peer mentor. And one of the things he did was he would pop down to the floor all in one motion, then pop back into his chair. And that was the coolest thing I had ever seen. And I think it inspired me to push whatever limits I had thought or seen myself having in the chair. But it also helped me recognize very early on the inequalities that exist in the world for people in wheelchairs. He was a paraplegic, I was a quadriplegic. So he was much more capable than me physically. But I was an American with insurance. He was going back to a life of uncertainty where he had no source of income, no family support, government that didn't have support systems in place for him. So I think that really shaped and inspired me to keep doing what I can do for myself and for others. And that was an important inspiration for me. Back to you, Corey.
Thank you, everybody, for sharing, a little bit about yourself and some of the things that have inspired you and some of the people. It's important because we're in a time period where there's so much political infighting, there's so much of racial and financial inequality that's happening not only in our nation, but as just a global issue. And one thing that does not discriminate is disability, and it affects all of us in one shape, way, or form. And that kind of leads me into the next set of questions I wanted to really ask everybody, being that we are celebrating African American History Month, and we're talking about some of the struggles that people of color have experienced, but more broadly, how has your disability coupled with your race or ethnicity, I would say, how have you been affected due to those two factors? And I know for one, I have not experienced so much like racism per se as being a person of color, but I have faced the like prejudicial like assumptions that people make. For example, when I and my wife were at church, this was like, she was my fiance during this time period. We had just left like Bible study. It was a Wednesday evening. And as we're exiting the sanctuary portion, a guy ran up to her and, greeted her, said, "Hey, Christy, how are you doing?" And then he looks and continues to speak to her, and then he says, "Are you at work?" And I was like, "What you mean? Like, what do you mean is she at work?" Like, in my mind, I'm just like, you assume that because this beautiful woman is next to a man in a huge, Rolls Royce of wheelchairs, I would say, is at work, and that somehow somebody with a disability can't have a partner or somebody in a fulfilling relationship. And it didn't just happen then, it happened recently, even last year. And one thing my wife has a tendency to do, which I think is very, very vital, is she always says, "This is my husband." And miraculously, everybody tends to correct themselves and overcorrect themselves. "Oh, I'm sorry, man. I didn't realize. I didn't know." And I think that's a challenge in society, is how can we find ways to reduce stigma behind people, whether it's your race, whether it's your disability, whatever that you're facing. How can we show people that we're not a stereotype alone? And I know for me, what I have a tendency to try to do is always let people find comfort in talking to me. I never badger people. I never, get offended, because in truth, they don't understand this type of experience. By all accounts, we've all experienced walking, so we know what it's like to be normal, end quote. But we also know what it's like to be disabled, and so we can represent both viewpoints, and most people can't. And so I would say, like, in a time where we just seem like so divided, that we have to try to make opportunity for other people to come into our tent and give them the ability to feel comfortable asking questions, to help, reshape maybe the way that they think about everything. But what are some ways that maybe you guys have faced some type of prejudice or even racial discrimination due to your disability? And if anything, has it changed you as a person?
Like I said, I was very fortunate in that I went back to my same job, and it was awkward at first because people would come rushing around me. "Oh, do you need help? Do you need help with that?" And at first I was kind of offended, but then I thought, it makes people feel good to help someone. So I tried not to let it bother me. The only things I've found frustrating is the places that I can't go, things that I used to do, because many of the places that I went, they were all built or in business before ADA compliance was even an act that had been passed. So I found myself getting frustrated that I couldn't go to places that I had been normally. But as far as, I don't think I've ever felt diminished by anyone. It's just every place I go, it seems like people want to help you. And like even when I leave my apartment building, if someone's in the hallway going out to the garages, they'll be, oh, let me get the door for you. And I'll say, oh, that's all right. I'll be fine. They try to run past me and get the door. So I open the door and I say, well, let me hold the door for you. But I think that people have been pretty accepting. I think it's much easier now than it was probably even 10 years ago. But it's interesting. I still see very few people in wheelchairs when I'm out in public.
A couple things. So before I got hurt, I remember running into a gal at the university where I was at the time. And she was saying to me, do you see my rat? And I kept thinking, I'm hearing her wrong. I'm hearing her wrong. She was in a wheelchair. And she said, no, no, no. And this whole conversation went back and forth for the longest time because I couldn't possibly believe that she had a rat with her and on her wheelchair. And I was so panicked because she was in a wheelchair that I just didn't know what to do. And so it gave me one perspective. And lo and behold, a year later, here I am in a wheelchair. After meeting my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, in a mall one day and walking around, there was a table where they were painting kids' faces. And they looked at Doug and said, would she like to have her face painted? And we kind of both laughed together and said no. And as we were walking away, the gal said, boy, they usually like to get their face painted. Now I'm like 20 at the time. And we still, I didn't even take offense to it. I just kind of looked at him and thought, oh, and my husband's teased me about it ever since. And so it wasn't something I took offended from. I took it more as they don't get it. And as I've grown over time, and just gotten out in the world, I just kind of make sure in a nice way, and I don't mind it otherwise, that they don't see me as me until they get to know me. For a while, I volunteered for a group of at-risk high school students. And I just let them get to know me. And pretty soon they didn't see me in a wheelchair. They saw me as who I was. And I'll say as a final thing, I never really had doors shut because of my disability until I didn't end up going to medical schools, but I have a PhD in neuroscience. But the reason why I don't have my medical degree, because I wanted to be a rehab doctor after what my doctor did in the hospital, is that when I was interviewing for medical schools in a couple of the East Coast schools, now this is 1990, and the dean of the medical school, one of the places, pulled me aside during the interview and he said, I just want to let you know that if you don't get in, it's because of your disability. And when he called to tell me that I had been rejected, he said, not only are you not a white male, you're disabled. And so the first part of my life to ever have the door shut, even though I had all the luxuries up to that point through kind of my athletic connections, was the medical community. So the community that inspired me most at the time was the first one to say, we're not letting you in because you're disabled. And so, I found a better avenue and life is good. But yeah, I remember just reflecting, thinking, you're the ones that are shutting the door, and you're the ones that really should be leading the way. And so it was an interesting perspective at the time, and I'll leave it at that.
Anybody else want to share how disability has caused you more to be discriminated against, or some things you may have encountered as far as like your race are concerned?
Actually, I have a quick question with that. When I was in university and one of my roommates, she was Black. Mm-hmm. She was from Texas. And we got into debates. She used to say to me, "You don't know what it's like to walk into a restaurant and have people point at you." And I was like, "Jackie, you got to be kidding me. I'm in a wheelchair. They point at me all the time and they ask about my parts." And it was an interesting interaction between what she was seeing as part of the world and I was seeing, and we were good friends. But it was a real interesting contrast how she and I got to learn about what she was facing versus what I was facing and what we thought about it. So I'll just put it out there because it was cool.
That's a very good point. It's going to lead me to the next couple of questions when it comes down to the inequalities faced by people of color coupled with disability, alongside also being a woman with a disability. As you alluded to, you said that, you're not a white male and you're disabled, yet you have all the credentials. And there's a staggering statistic that supports, not only the individuals that are here part of this discussion, but just some of those issues of discrimination as it pertains to race. So I read from the National Disability Institute, a study they did, I believe back in 2015, that African Americans are 14% more likely to become handicapped as opposed to 11% for non-Hispanic whites, 8% Hispanics, and I think it's much lower for people who are Asian. And so as I listen to all of us share our experiences, whatnot, I find that, and Nakeitha could add on to this, I'm not sure, but I don't have a college degree. I'm a Navy veteran, so I'm protected under the military as far as those benefits are concerned. So I didn't have to have the hardship in transitioning. But as Nakeitha spoke to, being an undocumented immigrant, and she's a woman of color and she's female, and I'm not sure she has a college degree, but not being able to fall back on your specialty that you learned in school is another reason why there's such a shift for people of color, and why those stigmas are like, yeah, I'm being pointed at on one hand because, it's visible. I'm in a wheelchair, but it's also visible because of my color. And sometimes our experiences prior to the disability also shape what we're thinking. And as I see here, like, more people who happen to be Caucasian go on to higher education, right? So you, Jonathan, Everett, and I, Teeman, right? By the grace of God, you guys have something to fall back on. Doesn't mean that your struggle's not real. That's what I think people miss maybe in those studies. The struggle is still real. You still have to overcome the same obstacles. Got to get to class on time. Everett talked about an apartment that's not ADA compliant. Those things, regardless of your race, are still an issue, and that we need more accessibility into. But your friend is right. You kind of feel that way. I mean, quick example. I went into the hospital one day, and the guy happened to be Black, and he looked at me. He's like, "You didn't get shot, did you?" And I'm like, "Nah, man, it was a diving accident." But that's the assumption. Black man, young, you couldn't have did anything else. You probably got shot. You know what I mean? Because that is something that's going on prevalent in the African-American community. But it leads me to say, like, aside from race in the issues of more so pertains to issues of disability, what are some urgent issues you think that are surrounding us with disabilities, and how can we first, because I think we have to be the vanguard to allow people in to our world so that they can make the changes. What do you think? What do you guys think we can do in our own community to support one another and get other people to support some of our key issues and concerns?
I think the first thing we need to do as a whole is basically just listen instead of, just assuming that we know what each individual actually needs. We should listen to their needs because, I've been in this country since I was a child, and I feel like even though I got hurt here, my needs weren't met because nobody actually listened to what I needed, and they just assumed, okay, well, we'll just go through this procedure, we'll just settle this case and it's over. But for me, it wasn't over because I was still left undocumented. I was still left without medical to help me after, get medical supplies and see the doctor. It took me like years before I could even get health insurance. So I feel like listening, I can't really go to my city hall and express my needs and wants because as an undocumented person, they feel as if, I have no needs and I have no wants until I become a citizen. And I feel like that's wrong because I have so much to offer to my community when it comes to helping other people who might be new or transitioning into this world of being differently abled. But I feel like my voice is not going to get heard because I don't have a piece of paper that says I'm legal here. So therefore, I can't really help the next person that needs to be helped or reach out to certain people because they don't feel like I'm qualified or I have enough education. Of course, I graduated from high school, but I feel like sometimes that's not enough to be heard. So I think listening to people is the number one key to just finding out what we all need and how we all can help each other, basically.
There's a group in Kentucky that I got connected to, and it's various people of various disabilities. And I had a fellow reach out to me from New York City that's kind of stuck he's stuck in sort of a assisted living. I don't know what kind of facility we call it, but he's stuck there with no nurses or nurses that don't answer calls or attendants, and his quality of life is terrible. And so I was reaching out to this group because I think a lot of that is trying to find out what are the best networks to get into. And because I wasn't ever in need of this, I had a nice pathway in life, that I'm seeking out these groups to say, hey, what does this guy do? And they were giving me a bunch of sites and places to go explore where if he wants to work, where he can do this and how he can get into more of an independent type of facility. And so I think a lot of this is who you know and how you get access to it. It's a few times now because I'm working with a clinical trial, and so there's a lot of quadriplegics that call in, and a lot of them are really looking for, I want better quality of life. Getting better with your disability is one thing and improving, but it's also a more immediate thing. And so I'm relearning or learning how to get access and network people so that they can have access and be able to have better quality of life. And so I see that in in a lot of people that just don't have the pathway that, let's say, Everett and Jonathan and I have had. And I think a lot of times that might be race certainly has a big play in this, and I think economics has a lot to do with it, and all these factors put a lot of people at much more of a disadvantage. And the more I think what unites us and can unite, that can sprout into many other things that teach the rest of the greater world of what to do, is uniting as a group that's disabled and networking within, and then you teach everybody else from there. And so there's power in having that disability and being able to help one another. And in fact, Corey, you'll laugh, but when I was in the hospital, one of my best buddies, because I was in LA, was a gunshot wound. And we shared many stories. We shared actually even during the last change of shift, when someone would get was going to get discharged, smoking marijuana in the hospital with them to send them off to a fun life. But he remained in my life for a long time. But when he got discharged, he was kind of left out in the sense that he got sent home and he had no car. And I would drive over there and we'd go hang out. But he had, his access was very different from mine from the time we got discharged.
To what you're saying, Krista, and to what Nakeitha was saying, I think one of the big issues that we have to face and can face as the disabled community is that we can't advocate for accessibility and disability rights and those things in isolation to all the other issues like racism, like inequity, like immigration reform, to give opportunity to people, who are living here, who are undocumented and not citizens. And we have to do all of that at the same time, and we have to call out the non-disabled folks to come with us, because we see it all. We're a very diverse community because this happens to everyone, no matter where you're from, no matter your income, no matter your race. We all get spinal cord injuries. We all get something else. And so we're able to have that perspective. So I think that's something really powerful that we need to do and call other people to do too.
Definitely. And I think that's our universal language, is our disability and our ability to also self-advocate, because, no one's going to be a better voice or represent you better than yourself. And if you can find people to partner alongside of you, that just makes it all the better. And so hopefully we can continue to have conversations like these, not only at home, but abroad, that will draw more attention to help change things to make it equitable for everyone. With everything that's going on in the world with respect to the COVID crisis, I've made a two-part question. How has this experience affected you, and how has access to the vaccination, or what are your thoughts about receiving the vaccination, given that we are all a part of a group that are more prone to possibly having worse side effects or issues from COVID? And just leave it open for anybody to give their take.
I personally don't. I mean, I know that a lot of us in the disabled community have a lot of health issues, you know, that go beyond UTIs and et cetera. But I personally don't think I'm going to take the vaccine unless I am told I must take the vaccine. Because, I mean, I follow the protocols, wash hands, wear masks, you know, take care of oneself before you go amongst another person or whatever. Stay home if you're sick. And I don't think it should be forced on us if we, you know, if we don't, I can't say I don't have COVID-19 because I don't have the symptoms, but I feel like as long as I take care of myself, I don't feel like I'm going to be fully exposed to COVID. So the more I take care of myself and follow the precautions, I don't feel like I should be forced to take the vaccine. I take the flu shot because when I do get sick, my immune system has gotten weak and I do have a touch of asthma. So by the grace of God, with having the one thing that I'm able to have as an undocumented immigrant, which is healthcare, I'm grateful that I'm still able to see my doctor and get an asthma pump so that if I do feel wheezing coming on, I know that I can just pump on my asthma pump and, you know, relax, relate, release. But I don't feel like a vaccine is for everyone, especially when we as the Black and Brown community can't trust the government as far as we can throw them. So, I mean, to each his own. I don't say we as a disabled community don't need the vaccine, because some of us that are older, yes, definitely take it. But if I'm only in my 40s and I don't think that I need the vaccine at all right now. So, you know, that's just my take on it.
So, Nakeitha, it makes me sad because I'm a scientist. Now, my own mother, I must say, thinks that the vaccine is the mark of the devil or that you're the one that's going to hell, and she drives me nuts. And she's very conspiratorial. And I actually, with her, really have a difficult time with that because the science is my background. And I can tell you that someone I know, well, the virologists that I know and I work with, they're all getting the vaccine. And I'm working with a clinical trial, and we are held to such high standards to even work with someone with a disability, much less what the FDA holds us up to for safety. It's intense, and it's quality controlled, and the hoops that we have to jump through every day just to do what we're doing with the clinical trial for spinal cord injury, that I have my full faith in the science behind the vaccine. And the moment I can do it, I'm in there, and I'll take it right next to you if you'd be willing to do it, because that's the faith I have in the science behind it. And I can also tell you that I went into the hospital in November because I had extremely high fevers that I've never had before. And to be in the hospital in isolation without access to anyone was so difficult for me, because if I had been in there for more than 4 days and now all of a sudden I'm trying to do a bowel program in the hospital by myself or try to teach nurses, would have been absolute nightmare for me. And so the ramifications, even though as somebody has a spinal cord injury and C6, I'm not necessarily more at risk of getting it or even the ill effects, but if I get those effects and I end up in the hospital, that's a whole nother plan of study, because you're now stuck and you're isolated and you don't have access to anyone who gives a crap about you. The nurses are great, but they're absolute stressed, panicked, and terrorized themselves. And they don't have time to give a lot of time to people. So I'll tell you that it breaks my heart when I hear what you say. And I hope you pay heed that it's sad.
I mean, if it comes down to a life and death choice and I have to take this vaccine to save my life, I'm definitely going to stick out my arm and get this shot. But I'm just worried about the side effects, because not everybody's body is going to relate to this vaccine the same way.
Well, for sure. But take note of the scientists and what they're doing. And I'm not saying you've got to do it, but my mom is just a crazy person. But you have a real, probably built-in history on this, and it's sad, and it's hard that this is what we've come up with through history in this country.
And not to jump in on you guys, but I just wanted to echo her sentiments, because it is a deeply disturbing history for men and women of color. Not only what has been done and forcefully placed, but also the a lot of accomplishments in the medical field would not be so had African Americans not going through that fire, through the guinea pig kind of program. But what I will say is this, what Chris is saying is true. There is a lot of data out there that has shown the efficacy of the COVID vaccination. It isn't for everybody, and everybody does react differently. I can say, as a Black man who is 38 and as a C4, C5 quadriplegic, I took the vaccine. I got my first dose on the 20th of January, my second dose on the 8th. I had those same concerns. I know about the Tuskegee experiments. I know about Henrietta. I've done extensive research. And my wife also received the vaccination as well. And I received no ill side effects. I got the Pfizer and BioNTech vaccine, no headache, no fever, no chills. And I was concerned about that, because I'm like, I don't do well with headaches as it is. I God bless anybody who can get through a headache. Me, I need the world to shut off, because I can't deal with headaches. But it worked out fine. And, so I hope that in this process of, what we're doing tonight, discussing openly and being honest and candid, and we have representation from the science community. I'm quite sure as an IT man, Everett probably can show statistical numbers, whatnot. Jonathan is, working hard with, discussing these talking points about what can we do to help our community and what have you. So if you do find that level of trust, please definitely do it. You know what I mean? It's important, but we all have to move at at our own individual pace, and I think that's that's what maybe we can kind of take from all of this is our journey is one that is not a sprint. It's a it's a marathon, and we have to make the individual strides, and hopefully through those strides connect the pieces that will hopefully unify not only our community, but the global community as a whole, because of COVID does not discriminate. It is definitely something that we can all kind of relate to in some way, shape, or form, because it's disabled the entire globe.
And that's so true. And being a white man and former conservative in high school, I was much more conservative than I am now. Seeing the whole, response with people choosing not to wear masks, saying, well, I'm not going to wear a mask because it's an infringement on my rights, when the reality is that by wearing a mask, we protect each other. And Nakeitha is absolutely right in terms of the fears and the history. It's not your fault, Nakeitha, for the way you feel. That's our problem. It's my community's problem, and mistakes in the past that have led to those, led to that history, led to that mistrust. And I think my hope is that we can help people through this discussion and others like it recognize that, it's not about individual rights. It's not about individual health. It's about the health of our community and what we can do for each other to help us all move forward.
No, I've got my appointment. I am going to get the vaccine, because as far as protecting myself, I don't know if it'll do anything to protect me. I was thinking of it more so as I'd be less likely to pass it on. And I just wanted to ask Corey, have you had the second dose yet?
Yes, I did. I got my second dose February 8th.
Okay. And you had no side effect after the second dose?
None whatsoever. So the initial nurse during the first shot, she told me 18 hours after the first shot, she had flu-like symptoms, very fatigued. So I was like winding down the clock. I was just like, okay, I'm at 18 hours. I don't feel anything. And then when 24 hours rolled around, I was like, I still don't feel anything, because I was really focusing on the headache and being lethargic. And I conducted everything same way, still taught my kids with homeschool, still ran around with them. And then when we went in for the next shot, because, once you take the shot, they monitor you about 15 minutes because some people have allergic reactions shortly thereafter. But my wife, she had like a little mild nausea and a little arm pain about maybe a day or so. The nausea was actually like in the first 15 minutes, but that went away after she ate. But no, I had no issues, none whatsoever.
You're young. How'd you get in on that inside track is what I want to know.
That's one of those things that we talked about, who you know and the accessibility. So being a vet is what gave me the access. We literally were coming home from taking the kids out to the mall, and I got a call like probably 7 at night, like, hey, you interested in taking the vaccine? And at first I was like, because I didn't think it was going to come that quickly. So I was just like, let me call you back. So I talked to my wife about it, and she was apprehensive just as much as I was. And I said, well, when I look at the totality, right? So we have almost 500,000 people have perished in this country alone. Millions of people worldwide. I know 3 people with the same first name who got COVID. I have a cousin who got married in October, and his wife died in December of COVID. I have a uncle whose ex-girlfriend died of COVID, and she just went into a rehab facility to rehabilitate, not because of COVID, and she contracted it and she passed away. So, you know, I took into all of those factors and how close I came into contact with COVID back in April of last year. So seeing all of that and just trying to weigh out like the long haul issues that I have friends who, like I have a friend who still cannot taste everything. Like he's about to quit chicken. Like, I'm like, who quits chicken? Like he wants to quit chicken because he's like, it just tastes horrible. Another friend who's out of breath, walking up and down, you know, the flights of stairs at her home. So, you know, by the grace of God, because I'm a vet, that is what gave me access to it. So I'm very, very fortunate because I would probably fall in phase 1, group C, you know, whichever way the CDC rolls it out. And I hope when it's you guys' turn, that you able to take it and it protects you, and that you guys have no side effects, none whatsoever. I really hope that does not occur to anybody else.
All right. Well, so then let's wrap that up. Thank you so much, Corey, for hosting this discussion. Thank you, Everett,
No problem.
Nakeitha, and Krista for joining in. You've been listening to More Than Walking's first video discussion. Come back for another discussion next month. We come up with another interesting topic. And thanks so much, everyone. Have a good night.
You too,
God
man.
bless y'all. Stay safe.
God bless.
All right.